bring to your attention. I was going to get you to listen this up. I think you'll find this funny. Uh, there, there's some things when you get on an airplane, there's some things you don't want to hear. If all of a sudden the pilot comes on the loudspeaker and says, "Sorry for the bumpy ride, this pilot was just dodging some trees." You don't want to hear that. Here's another one. He gets on the loudspeaker and says, "We're beginning our descent now, hopefully on purpose." I thought this was crazy. He said, "We're next in line for takeoff, so as soon as we back up the aircraft, the rubber band will snap and away we go." You don't want to hear that, do you? And here's one. He said, "You don't want to hear this if you're in flight." Pilot gets on and says, "We'll be on the ground in 15 minutes, sooner if you'll all lean forward." That's awful. Those are some things you don't want to hear, you know. Well, we're looking at the book of Judges, and we're in chapter 15, the life of Samson, and we're dealing with those old sorry Philistines. Us Philistines have been if you would, a thorn in the flesh of Israel from way back there in the book of Exodus. And Moses, in his song that he sang in Exodus 15, said this: "The people shall hear and be afraid. Sorrow shall take hold on the inhabitants of Palestina." Now, Palestina was a land that was inhabited by the Philistines. In fact, Palestina is a Philistine name. That wasn't their land. That land they were inhabiting belonged to the children of Israel. God gave it to them. And so Moses, when he's way out of the time before Joshua comes and leads them into the promised land, Moses says, hey, he pronounced a curse on them. Not only did Moses pronounce a curse on them, Isaiah pronounced a woe unto them when he named them in his prophetic book, and he named them along with the country of Edom and Moab. And then the psalmist said this when he mentioned those who should be readily judged. He said Edom, Moab, and Philistia. And so Philistia is a name of the land that they called, that it wasn't theirs. Today, the Palestinians are still saying it's their land, and it's not their land. And the Philistines came out of the sea around Greece, and they made their way up into the Mediterranean and brought with them their culture and their warlike mentality. They were very cruel and uncivilized in their treatment of other people. And yet they got, and it's a type of, really, the Philistines are a type of unsaved people who are claiming to have the blessing of God on their life. They came into the land that Israel was to possess in a natural way. And what I mean by that, they followed the coast up and went right up that way. Didn't have to go through anything. Didn't go through the Red Sea. Didn't go through the crossing of the Jordan, which typified death and resurrection. And didn't go through any of that. They just went in there and said, we're claiming this land. It wasn't theirs to claim. And that's why we have a picture of professing Christendom who are not possessors of the Lord Jesus Christ. When you get on TV and watch the high churches, and all their ceremonial glory and how they operate, and you go, what? Really, where do you find all that in the New Testament? You won't find it from Matthew all the way through to Revelation. You won't find all the stuff they're doing, swinging incense lamps and all of this. It's not in there. And yet they have made a business and a world domination out of it. And you know who they don't like? Bible Christians. They're against Bible-believing Christians, while they claim to be God's people. So they're a modern-day type of the Philistines. They want the benefits of the land. They want the power of the land, so to speak, but they have not gone through what a child of God has gone through at the death, burial, resurrection of Christ. They haven't been bought by the blood. They try to sneak in another way, a natural way. The Bible says the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, neither can he know them. So when you look at these narratives, these true events found in the book of Judges, they are actual historical accounts. But at the same time, it's a teaching from the Lord about our life and the life of others. So everything's relevant. Whether it's in Genesis, Exodus, it's all relevant because there's more to it than just the event that happened. God reveals. In fact, Paul continued to remind the Corinthians, said, these things were written aforetime for our admonition, that we might learn. So he gives us the events of the past, and he tells us, be sure to pay attention to that because God has revealed life in the Old Testament for the New Testament Christian. Now, we get to that and we find old Samson. And who's he fooling with? The Philistines. He's got tied up with the Philistines. These ungodly people. And why would the chosen man of God be hanging out with a bunch of God-forsaken Philistines? And what it did to him, it eventually became his demise. And listen, I know today, I run into Christians all the time, one in particular recently, and he was bragging about how he's free from all the rules and regulations that he was taught as a boy. And what he meant is you like to hit the bottle. That's what he meant. He wouldn't say it, but that's what he meant. He liked to drink it up, and he didn't want anybody telling him getting drunk or drinking all the time. He didn't want him telling that a Christian shouldn't have a testimony like that. Christians should have a life of purity, absent from that, just to stand up and tell people. But I thought, now, in his mind, he has arrived. And I know this person. They think they've arrived. I look at him and see a miserable guy. He thinks he's successful because he's able now to throw off all of that which he was taught out of the Bible as a child. And you know what his end's going to be? It's not going to be good. Now, he's saved. I have no doubt he's saved. But boy, look how Samson had to go out. What a miserable way to go. And so I get to this thinking, and I run into these people, these type of people, from time to time. And I've also run into them now for 50 years. And I've been around long enough to see the end of their way. Every now and then one gets right as they get older, decide maybe I went too far. Maybe my desire not to be under legalism, which that's what everybody calls a Christian life, is legalism. They love to say, if you live a Bible standard, then you're a legalist. Legalism is depending on the law to give you salvation. It's not a lifestyle. It's a dependence. Christian living, Bible living, is a testimony thing. Hey, all things are lawful, but all things are not expedient. And so they can't get that right. And eventually, every now and then you see one who has an opportunity to put the pieces back together, because what happens, the pieces go apart eventually. What may be working fine for a Christian right now who's playing with the Philistines, it may be okay for right now. But in the long run, it's not going to turn out right. So that's what we see in the life of Samuel. He just couldn't. He started out with the woman of Timnath. He saw her. She looked good. Parents said you ought not to fool with her. He said, you get her for me. And then, you know, all that took place after that, the riddle and her betraying him and selling him out to her kinfolk, and then all the stuff that went on where they ended up eventually burning his wife and father up, and giving his wife first to his best friend, and then after that they ended up just burning her with fire. And so then he gets mad, and he's going to, take his revenge out, and he did. And he went down and he slew a bunch of them, I believe 1,000 of them to begin with. And he said, they've done me wrong, I'm going to do them wrong again. As they've done unto me, that's what we're going to do. And you know what the Philistine said? As he's done unto us, that's what we're going to do to him. So this tit for tat stuff, listen, if you want a life of it, you get in it. There's sometimes you just got to forgive and let go. Say, I've been done wrong. I'm not going to harbor it. I'm going to turn it loose. Let God take care of it. I'm moving on in life. That's the best policy. But if you get in this, they hurt me, I'm going to hurt them, so then you hurt them back, and then they hurt. There's no end to it. Just destruction and devastation everywhere. So he got that all going there. And then in verse 9 of chapter 15, we covered that the Philistines went up and pitched in Judah and spread themselves in Lehi. And the men of Judah said, why are you come up against us? And they answered, to bind Samson are we come up, and to do to him as he hath done to us. Kind of switched the golden rule around. They said, as he has done unto us, so shall we do unto them. And so they didn't, revenge is what they had. Verse 11, then 3,000 men of Judah, I'll never understand why it took 3,000 of them, went up to the top of the rock of Edom. That's where Samson had gone after he'd killed 1,000 of them. He went up on his stone mountain type of thing, and said to Samson, knowest thou not that the Philistines are rulers over us? Now, I want you to get the picture. The children of God had become so defeated and so interwoven and so acceptance of the dominance of the lost worldlings who had a religion about them that they just gave up. And rather than know that Samson was given to them as a deliverer from the Philistines, God separated him before he was born. And then he was raised by godly parents with that Nazirite vow. God had raised him up to be a judge in Israel, to deliver them from the treatment of the Philistines. But the people of God, they seemed to forgot all about that. And they said, what's the matter with you, Samson? Don't you know these people are our rulers? I would have thought they would have said, hey, Samson, we're getting behind you, buddy. You got the power, you've got the skill, and God's with you. You're able to slay 1,000 of them, one of you. And you've done all, you killed a lion, you did all that. But no. But isn't that now, when you look at, and I had to equate this in my mind to all these liberal churches today that have joined the perversion of the worldly anti-God people and started claiming their morals and say, hey, don't you know we live in this world today like this? We're in a different world. No, you're not. You're in the same world. You just need to take a stand, come out from among them and be ye separate, saith the Lord. But no, they said, no, we kind of got to be like them to reach them. We got to adapt their principles and their ways and their methods and their morals. And look what they're doing now. They're hanging flags out on their church bragging about it. Can you imagine that? Bragging about their immoral stands that came straight out of hell. And historically, not only biblically, but historically, has been a great catastrophe for every culture that's ever went that way. There's no end to the debauchery. doesn't end there. It goes further and further and further down. Now, I heard the other day that they don't want you to call pedophiles anymore. They want you to call them child attractive people, underage attractive. That's what you call. You call them an underage attractive person. People who are attractive to underage people. No, pedophile. That's the word that's been given them for centuries. But now they're not that anymore because we want to incorporate even their way into our lifestyle. So minor attracted is what it's called. Minor attractive people. What a pathetic thing, is it not? Well, it happens. And I'm figuring these churches that hung out those rainbow flags will be hanging out those flags in due time. Saying, hey, y'all come in here. We all know people have different challenges. In fact, it was about 30, 35 years ago, there was, even amongst Bible fundamentalists, there's a thing of don't be preaching on hard sin on Sunday morning. That was sort of the word to be sent out. Don't chase them off before you can get them in. Where'd that come from? I still remember the preacher preaching when I was 8 or 9 years old. He was blasting everybody. We didn't have, listen, you walked out there, you were guilty of something he said. You know, there was no way to get around it. It's like, you know, whatever it was, he'd find it, blast you, tell you how sorry you were. And I remember as a youth director, I got one of the kids to sign up. We were going to go to the Bill Rice Ranch. And I was having some problems. You know, they get up 11th and 12th grade and they start getting summer jobs. And, you know, and that crowd you had at 9th and 10th, you know, they were all ready to go to camp. But then they get 11th and 12th, they're working and they don't want to. And so I was getting aggravated with them, you know, because I'm trying to get this trip going. And so I just got up there and chewed them out. I told them, you bunch of sorry, no good for nothing teenagers. If you was right with God, you'd quit those jobs. You know, I mean, just unloaded on them. And one of their parents came up to me, who was really a good friend. He said, hey, brother, he said, don't you think you could use a little honey? Maybe honey will attract the bees. I said, well, you may have a point there. Man, I'll never forget that poor old Richard and Mary Angela, they were in that class. I just chewed them out. I mean, I must have had a bad day. As I look back, oh, it's amazing they're sitting here, to tell you the truth. They're sitting here. I still marvel over that. Shannon, you know, they went through all that. Oh, boy. But I saw, back then, you know, the youth pastors would get up and they'd holler, shut up, somebody, you know, just, it was a different time, wasn't it? But the principal did that at school, too. I mean, he didn't, you know, he wasn't too politically correct. When I graduated from high school, the principal didn't care what you thought and what your mom and daddy said. You broke the rules, you're going to get the board. And that's just the way it went. Well, Samson's living in the wrong place. He's with the people of Timnath, and he's had a big deal happen to him. And it says the 3,000 men went up and said, don't you know verse 11, these Philistines are rulers over us. And what is this that thou hast done unto us? You're going to cause life to be hard because you've killed 1,000 of their people. So what are you doing, Samson? I wonder if he said trying to deliver you from these heathen. You know I can do it. But he said unto them, as they did unto me, so have I done unto them. Verse 10 at the bottom, they said, we are come up to do to him as he hath done to us. So this thing's getting out of hand, is it not? He said, you know what? I'm going to do to them just like they've done to me. They said we're going to do to him just like he's done to us. And he said in verse number 12, And they said unto him, we've come down to bind thee, and that's what they do. When you get tangled up with the world's crowd, they're going to bind you. They will. Young people get tangled up with them, they're going to bind them. There are no Christian young people that can handle the Philistines. They're just not out there. I pray to God we've got some of our kids in college now, some of the youth, and I know what they're going to try to do to them. They're going to try to bind them. They're going to try to confuse them. They're going to try to cause them to doubt their Christian faith. That's just the way it is. All three of mine went to University of West Florida. They knew when they went in there that this was what they were going to try to do to them. So they were aware of it. But many parents will send them off there and never tell them nothing. Say, well, just y'all go make good grades. Well, when they get in there, they got to be like Moses. They got to go in the Egyptian place, learn everything they could, and never buy into it. That's how you got to do it. You got to be like Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. They mastered the Babylonian way, the science, the numbers, the astronomy, and they mastered it. But they never bought it. They just knew it as well as those people, if not better. And so all of our kids that come up through here and go, every time they go into a secular university, I go, oh no, here it goes. I hope they stay in the Bible. I hope they accept what they were taught, because they're going to try to undo it. Well, it said there in verse number 12, he said, we've come up to bind thee, that we may deliver thee into the hand of the Philistines. That's a sorry bunch. And Samson said unto them, swear unto me that ye will not fall upon me yourselves. And I really believe he wasn't worried about those 3,000 men. He just killed 1,000 by himself. He could kill 3,000 of them. He didn't want to kill his own brethren. He was supposed to deliver them. So he said, just make sure you don't fall on me. And they spake unto him, saying, no, we won't, but we'll bind thee fast and deliver thee into their hand, but surely we will not kill thee. And they bound him with 2 new cords and brought him up from the rock. So these people, in their ignorance, and I think it is that, because they did not understand how powerful God was. They should have known, but at this point they didn't understand, or they had forgotten it. They not only wouldn't stand with Samson, they wouldn't even come to the aid of Samson when these men that they voluntarily became a tool of the government, the Philistine government, to bind the man of God who was to be their deliverer. They voluntarily, and the Jews did that, if you recall, at the crucifixion of Christ. It was his own people that sold him out. It was Judas that sold him for 30 pieces of silver, and then it was the Jews who were out there in that mob saying, crucify him, crucify. He said, well, how about Barabbas? He's been a murderer. No, we don't care about Barabbas. Crucify him. Because they were mad because he said he was come to deliver them. So you kind of see a type there going on, that they bound him, if you recall. And Samson, though, in verse number 14, and when he came unto Lehi, the Philistines shouted against him. Now, why would they do that? The brethren of Samson, the Jews, they offered a way to get this crisis taken care of that wouldn't cost them. And they did what they were going to do to what they told the Philistines they'd do. And then Samson agreed that he would cooperate. And yet when it came down, what did they do? They went berserk. That tells me you can't trust the world. I don't care what agreement you give them. They came out, this World Economic Forum today, came out and said that America is going to have to get rid of hate speech in order to be a successful world leader. That says this: America's going to have to stop the mouths of those who proclaim Bible truth. That's hate speech to them. And that's all it can mean. Because America is promoting alternate lifestyles. America has no moral rules except you can't say anything about their immoral lifestyle. That's a moral rule. So when they say when the World Economic Forum says America's going to have to get rid of this, and one person got up and said, and it will be soon. It will be soon. So I have no doubt that they're going to come down, and they already have begun in some respects, but they're going to come into these churches that are holdouts, and they're going to shut them down one way or the other. They're going to try to shut them down. And they're going to take your buildings, and they're going to tax you out, and they're going to throw the preacher in jail if he doesn't quit talking about their sin. You know, it's just kind of the way it's gone down through the ages, and it's come to America now. And so that's basically what happened here. They turned on the very people they agreed with, and so all these Christians out here saying, well, listen, let's just give them this little bit, and let's give in here, and let's give in here. Well, you can give it all up, and they're still going to turn against you. That's the way the Philistines are. And they were like that here. And it says, and they shouted against him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. That's one thing they didn't bank on. The Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and the cords that were upon his arms became as flax that was burnt with a fire, and his bands loosed from off his hand. So it was a supernatural act by God that these cords that these 3,000 people bound him with, and you know, nothing like a fire to break a rope. You can take a torch or a fire or a cigarette or something to glow, and you can burn through some cord. You can just burn through it. And according to this particular flax was organic rope. I think that's the best way we can describe it. It's the real deal. And so he got it burnt, and I'm not sure how it came, but they said his arms burst through, and it was like somebody had burnt the ropes. And he found a new jawbone of an ass, and this is another conflict that God permits, but it was against the rule for a Nazarite, but he's broken so many. He's already broken just about every rule there was. He wasn't supposed to touch anything that was dead. And so this jawbone of an ass, it was a newly fresh kill. Now that thing's about that big, and it does have a ball at the end where the jaw's connected, and then it's got a sharpness up and down the jaw out to the lip. So I don't know how he did it. I don't know if he killed 1,000 of them at one slaying. There's some reason to believe that he just went through there and he killed a bunch of them, and he went to the next group and killed a bunch of them. And because it says that he put forth his hand and took it and slew 1,000 men therewith. And Samson said, with the jawbone of an ass, heaps, notice this, heaps upon heaps. So that gives me a picture of piles of people. He came up on a group of 50, killed them. Maybe came up a group of 100, killed all of them. But when it was all said and done, he killed 1,000 of them. Hey, only by the supernatural power of God could he do that. No man has that ability. You could have the greatest Bruce Lee person, kung fu guy in the world. You know how they do that? Those old Bruce Lee movies, they'd send 12 or 15 of them after him, and he'd whip them all. But he's not going to whip 1,000 of them. He can't whip 1,000. But Samson whipped 1,000 of them. And he did it with one of those unusual tools that you find in the book of Judges. Remember, Shamgar took an ox goad, killed a bunch of people. Remember the tent peg that was drilled through the head there? There's several there in the book of Judges that are strange things. They're not swords and they're not spears, but they're tools in the hand of God, ordained by God, and God can do so much with what He wants. And it said that it came to pass when he had made an end of speaking that he cast away the jawbone out of his hand and called the place Ramoth Lehi. Of course, Lehi actually means jawbone of an ass. So he basically said heaps and heaps of jawbone or asses is what he said. And when he was sore thirst now he's thirsty. And this is strange. You don't hear much of Samson ever doing this. And he called on the Lord. Well, he's getting real spiritual. And said, Thou hast given this great deliverance into the hand of thy servant. And now shall I die for thirst and fall in the hand of the uncircumcised? You going to let me die now that you accomplished this great feat of deliverance? See, it was all about him being the tool God used to deliver Israel. And had the Philistines kept those people captive, it would have messed up the whole plan of God for the future. All of God's sovereign plan was in place, and it would be not set aside by man. And God would accomplish it if it took a guy holding the jawbone of an ass and killing 1,000 of them. I mean, it's amazing when you think about it. I mean, there's the plan of God for before the foundation of the world. And he had it all. And these Philistines go, we're going to circumvent that, Satan using them, And God said, no, I'm going to do something. Yeah, it looks like you got the advantage, but you really don't. You just are setting yourself up for a mighty fall. And that's part of this plan. Lord willing, we'll look into it. It's coming to an end. Samson, odd thing about it, in the last verse, it says that he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. Now, that doesn't end Samson's life. But you know what? It almost appears that God quit using Samson as a deliverer judge. Although he was still one, he ends up in the end of his life being one. But he just sort of took his life and said, here it is. Boom. 20 years. And then the rest of it's pretty much downhill. The rest of Samson's life, there's really not a whole lot good about it at all. I was going to give you real quick they came out today and said they found these strange birds in China up in the rocks. And they said, this has to be a way to us to evaluate the evolutionary process, which will enable us to understand how these birds turned into something else. And so therefore we can look up in the rock strata, and we've noticed there are different levels and different stratas that we find these animals in. And some of them are more well preserved than others. They can't figure out in the 10 to 13 million year period that they're saying, they can't figure out how these things happen where you can find a well-preserved person at a lower strata, which is debris and decay and all the stuff that. Well, after reading this, and I'm saying it's the most foolish, sort of jabberish language that these guys use. They cloak their foolishness in big words that mean nothing. It says researchers concluded, after about 3 pages of this stuff, that there were 2 possible explanations for STM, that's the birds we're talking about, rapid burial. 2 possible. Volcano activity or a powerful rainstorm washing it away and burying it under debris. Okay. I know one that lasted 40 days and 40 nights. But they actually came to this is their conclusion after talking about how it took 13, but they believe it was 13 million years, but they can't understand why these birds, these so-called prehistoric birds, end up being so well preserved as though they died suddenly and recovered. And then they say the most likely explanation, due to the fact that fossils in the pyroclastic flows don't preserve soft tissue well, is that the bird was swept away by a rainstorm and rapidly buried at the bottom of a lake. Hey, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. It's like their own scientists tell them there was a flood, a quick worldwide rapid flood. They admit that, but they will not admit it was the flood that God sent. It's crazy, isn't it? All right, let's bow our heads. We'll look forward to seeing you Sunday. Lord, we pray as we go, you protect us, and we remember to pray for those who are away from us, and bless each one in Jesus' name. Amen.